Hello folks, and what we have here is a welder. This is an inverter type based on IGBT technology, which is insulated gate bipolar transistor, specifically suitable for high power applications. So don't get confused with other devices that are sold on the web where they fit MOS devices inside, so MOS solid state switches. Those are not built for high power switching, but for high frequency switching. And of course, a inverter requires high power switching. So you're much better off with an IGBT built device. Now this device will deliver 180 amps and it has a duty cycle of 60%. Now 60%, that means you can weld for 6 minutes at full power, but then you need to stop for 4 minutes. We're going to look at this welder, what it can do. We're going to look at the attachments that come with it, and we're actually going to test it to see how good it really is. So let us first have a quick look on the attachments that come with it and the parts that you will still have to add, because you will need to add certain parts before you can actually use it. Now first of all, the welder looks very solid, and I have to say this looks like real quality build. You can feel it on the knobs, and the connectors look real well as well. And it comes with actually a cable for your ground clamp, and this is the standard ground clamp cabling. And if you want to weld stick, then you have this other clamp or pliers where you put the stick in and then you can weld with it. So these cables come with it. But also it has a very nice, and I have to say a very nice torch for MIG welding, metal inert gas, see, with a very nice push switch, and the whole front is very well built, and you get extra nozzles that feed the wire as well for the different sizes of the wire, because this welder can deal with different sizes of welding wire. You can even put welding wire with the flux in it, so you don't need gas. Now in general with a MIG you're going to need gas, so you will have to get a gas bottle separate together with the pressure regulator. Don't worry, we'll look at it in a few minutes. But what is so nice about this one is the removable connector, because in most cases on cheaper models you don't find this. So the torch will wear out over time, and that's a normal thing that happens. But with this device you can remove it and fit another torch on it. This is a standard or uniform connector, which is really great. The other component that you have with it is a TIG capability, and here is the TIG torch. I already assembled it a little bit for you, and it comes with a bag with different cups and different holders for the tungsten rod. Now the tungsten rod doesn't come with it, so that's something else you need to provide together again with the gas, the same thing as the MIG. Now for the gas you can use pure argon. Typically when I'm welding with a MIG, I'm having a mix of argon and carbon dioxide. But in this specific case, since I'm going to use the device for both purposes, I'm going to weld with straight argon, because that's what you're going to need for TIG. Alright, so let us now have a bit of a closer look to the parts that you will have to add to it. And then we're going to have a look on the controls, and then we have a look or a closer look on the auxiliaries, the cables, and how to connect them and how to put them all together. And then finally we do some testing. So if you're going to do some MIG welding, you're going to need wire to weld, and the wire is inside this door. And here is the reel. Now I already placed the reel in here, but normally you don't have that reel with the welder when you buy it. So you will need to buy a roll of wire, and the wire can be of any type. It can be 0.8, 0.9 or 1 millimeter, or even 0.6 millimeter. So this is straightforward wire for welding purposes. It all depends what you're going to weld. If you're going to weld inox, it's going to be different. So you need to make a choice on what kind of wire you want to use. Now in some cases you can use wire with a coating on it that allows you to weld without gas. The current reel that I have in here is a 5 kilogram reel at 0.8 millimeters. So for that one I'm going to need gas. So that's going to be the other thing we're going to need. So if you're going to weld with a bare wire with MIG, or you're going to weld with TIG, you're going to need this gas bottle. This is argon, and you have to have a flow and pressure regulator. Without it, it ain't going to work. So these are parts that you have to buy separately or get it locally. And the gas connection is in the back of the welder, and all what you need to do is connect your hose to it coming from your gas bottle, tighten it up. if you're going to select the MIG mode, then you have to connect the torch and the connector to the welder, and you will have to have a welding wire. And I'll show you in a few seconds on how to feed the wire into the system. Now the welding wire has a certain diameter. This is a 0.08, and you will have to make sure that the tip of the torch is having the right size of nozzle for that wire. And I'm happily surprised about the quality of the MIG torch connector itself. This makes it very handy to replace if ever, because that's going to wear out over time. Depending on the size of the wire that you're going to use for your MIG welding, you will need to adjust the front tip of the torch. And here is that part, and you can undo it and fit another part into it. It comes with 3 sizes, so that is really good, and there's a number marked on it, so to make sure that you have the right size of tip for the right size of wire. And right now, I don't know if you can see it, it's a 0.6 tip that's on it, so that's not going to fit, but I have 2 spare tips, a 0.8 and a 1mm tip. So I'm going to replace this tip. Now typically you can take this out with some pliers. I already loosened that up a bit, and I'm going to fit a 0.8. So here is the 0.8, and let's see if you can see it. So this is the 0.8 marking. So let's put the tip in, and then we should be all set. Now I'm not going to tighten it down because I'm going to feed the wire through it first, and I'll show you that later on how we fit the wire through the system. But let's put that aside for now. All right. If you're going to do TIG welding, then you will need to configure the torch yourself, and that all depends on what type of tungsten you're going to use. So you have like 3 different sizes of nozzles where the tungsten rod will fit in. So depending on the tungsten size, you have to select the proper nozzle. You will have to fit the nozzle into the holder, and I think I'm going to go for 2.4 because that's the kind of tungsten I have. Now remember, the tungsten is not part of the kit. So once we fit that in there, and then we'll screw it inside the torch itself, and then we can fit from the other side, we will fit then the tungsten rod, and I'll show you that in a few seconds. It also comes with different cups. So the cup is what will create the gas around the welding arc. So a large one to a small one, and then this part here goes at the end of the torch to hold and protect the tungsten rod that will be inserted inside. So let me remove that for now and let you have a look on the tungsten rods itself. Now the tungsten rod is your electrode, and it's a consumable. And I have 2 boxes here, and it doesn't come with the kit, by the way. You have to buy this separate, but you can buy it in any welding store. I'm going to use a 2.4mm, and that's why I had to use the right nozzle. Remember when I showed you the nozzle? You need to match that up to the diameter of the tungsten rod. I also have a 1.6 rod, so I can choose depending on what kind of work you need to do. Now remember, this is a consumable, but before you use it, you will have to sharpen the pin very well, just like it was a pencil. Otherwise, it's not going to work too well. All right, so let's try to fit this tungsten rod into the torch and then see how it all looks like. So we have decided to use a tungsten rod of 2.4mm. We've got part of the nozzle, and then we have the holder. And I used the holder 2.4. I don't know if you can see it. So we're going to put this together now. Put it inside the torch. I have not sharpened the pin yet on it. I'll do that later. And then we just feed it in there. Like so. See how that comes out? And let me close this up so we can lock it nicely into place. And with this part here, you actually can tighten the position of the tungsten rod. So if I tighten this up, see, now it's solid. If I loosen it up, I can pull it in and out. And that's important because you will have to do that while you're welding, because that tip is going to be a consumable. It's going to burn down. It's going to get smaller. You will have to grind it again and then put it back in and adjust it to the right length. And then finally, you will need to put a cup up. And here is a cup. And the cup is making sure that the gas is nicely distributed around the edge. Now obviously, as you can see, we don't see the tip of the tungsten right now. So you make sure that it sticks out a little bit, okay? Something like that, like half a centimeter is typically a good distance. It's something you have to experiment with and try out what works best for you. And here we go. That's the assembly of the torch for the TIG. So if you're going to TIG weld, then there's a gas regulation on the top here. And the only problem I see with this welder is that you need to feed the gas straight from your bottle here. And that's a bit of an annoyance. I would like to have seen it in electronic control, but it isn't. So this is kind of a manual gas control, turning it on and off. It is what it is, but I think this should have been a bit different. But it's workable. There's nothing wrong with it. So if you decide to use the MIG, then you got to make sure that you have gas. You got to make sure that you have the right wire of the right size, either 0.6, 0.8 or 1 millimeter. You make sure that the torch is adjusted to the right size of the wire, and then you should be good to go. If you decide to use the TIG mode, then you got to make sure that you have a tungsten rod of the size you want to have, adjust the torch for the size of the tungsten rod, and connect it all together. And of course you will need one extra element when you're going to weld with TIG, and that is of course the metal that you're going to add to the welding spot. So that's something else you're going to need to get separately. What type you want to use, what size you want to use, it all depends on what you are welding. And of course you're going to need gas as well, just like MIG. Now since it's a combined machine, I recommend to use argon for both applications. As the welder is a 3-in-1 device, the display will have multiple functions, and so are the knobs. So let me turn that on and so we can have a look. With the switch in the middle, you can toggle between MIG, which is now selected, to stick, and to TIG. And you can see that the displays are changing. So let's go back to the MIG welding. So if you're going to MIG weld, then we want to be able to set the speed of the wire. And that depends on what you're welding and on the wire thickness and so on. And you can adjust it with this knob. So that's the wire speed. You can also adjust the voltage, and here is the adjustment for the voltage. So you will have to find a proper balance between wire speed and voltage for MIG welding. If we go into stick welding, then things change a bit. Then the left-hand display is all about the amperage, and on the right-hand display you actually have the voltage being shown. And you probably can adjust the amperage with this button right here. So you can see that the controls are switching a bit. So here you can set the amperage up to 60 amps and down to or as low as 10 amps. This knob has no effect in this mode. You can turn on the VRD and then you can see the voltage is dropping here drastically, so you can't change that. The only thing you can change is the amperage, but not the voltage. If I change it, then you see a higher voltage appearing here. Now we have 60 volts versus the lower voltage of 10 volts. Now let's go to the TIG mode, and in the TIG mode you have an amperage setting. So if we turn this button here, now you can see the amperage is changing for TIG welding, but this button has no effect. Now let me go back to the MIG mode, and now you see something else here called 2T and 4T. If I click it, I can toggle between 4T and 2T. So what that means is if you select the 2T mode, I can depress the toggle here or the switch, and now I can weld. And if I let go, it will stop. In a 4T mode, I click, I let go, and now I can weld. And if I want to stop, I have to click and let go again. So that's the difference. And then the last function that we have here is this button right here, which is actually the feed for the wire. So once you're going to put the wire into the system, you need to push the button, and then the wire will feed out of the system. I'll show you that very shortly. So now let's say we want to do some MIG welding. So we're going to put in first of all the wire. And the wire goes right here. So you need to remove this knob. Inside where the wire wheel is, you will find this control. And if you turn it counterclockwise, you can lower this down. And in essence, what this does is provide pressure onto the wire to move the wire forward. And this is a rolling wheel that will push the wire forward. Now the real drive for that is over here. There's a motor behind, and that's going to feed the wire from this side in. It will come all the way through and out to the torch. Now depending on the wire size, you will have to have the right grooved wheel. So let me undo this. You can actually see it. And this is the feed wheel, which is rotating by a motor. And you can see the 0.8 marking. If I flip it over, so you can actually see it, 1.0. So that's the 1 millimeter feed. So when the sign is outwards, that is not the selection you do. It's the number that's inwards to the motor that is the actual selection. Let me show you that a bit better on the wheel itself. So here you can see a big groove and a smaller groove. So you should feed the 0.8 lead or wire in the small groove and then the 1 millimeter wire in the thick groove. So in my case, I'm using a 0.8. So I got to make sure that the 1 millimeter marking is pointing to the outside, meaning that the groove on the wheel for 8 mil, 0.8 mil is now right and aligned with the feed here. So now we can close this up, and I'm going to feed the wire. So here's the reel of wire, and I'm going to put it in. Now, if you're going to get a reel, get a small reel. The big reels don't fit because these reels come in 2 sizes. And then we can put this back up. Don't tighten it too much because there's no need for that. It should be able to rotate. Now, you got to make sure that the wire starts on the top, runs like this, and then goes in like this and feeds through. So I'm going to remove this wire from the locking hole. We feed the wire through this guide, then turn it back a bit, put the part inside, and then try to feed the wire inside the guide there, over the wheel. And as soon as you have that going, we can close the pressure wheel on it, making sure that the wire is in the proper groove, and then press this down. And how much pressure depends a bit on how well it feeds. So over time you might put some more pressure up. I don't know how much I put up right now, but I'm going to leave it like this. And now I'm going to turn on the machine. You already see the wire coming in slightly through, so now I'm going to push the button to advance the wire. See? And you really want to do this before you hook it up to your torch the first time. So now let's have a look on the torch, what we need to do, and then feed it through it. The wire is going into this connection here, right? So I'm going to slide it in by hand. There we go. See? I will try to make the proper connection. There we go. And lock it in place. So now at least I know that this is connected properly. Remember, on the torch, we have already connected the proper nozzle. That was this one. But to make sure that the wire comes out properly, I'm going to remove it first, and I'm going to feed the wire all the way through it. Push the button to advance the wire, and we should be seeing the wire coming out. There we go. You see it coming? So now I'm going to slide this over there and put the nozzle up. That, for me, has always been the best method to do something like this. And then I'm going to slightly lock it into place. Put it back together. What we just did was feeding the wire through the torch, and you don't need to do this every time. This is only necessary each time you replace the wire wheel. And of course we'll need to connect the ground clamp. if you're going to weld with the MIG to the minus pole. As I mentioned before, we can do MIG welding with a bare metal wire as we just installed, or you can do it with a metal wire with a flux around it. So that flux or the coat around it will then generate the gas. But in my case, we are using a bare wire and we're going to be welding with gas. So you have to make sure that if you weld with gas in MIG mode, that you do have the connectors as shown here. If you're going to use the MIG without gas and using a special wire for that, you will need to swap the two connectors over. So you have to undo one, flip over the cable to the other side and move that cable to this side. Alright, I got a thick piece of metal here and I have set the welder to MIG mode, and my wire speed is about 4.8 meters per minute and my voltage is about 15 volts. So I'm going to try to pull a little line and then see how that goes. And that goes very smooth, but as you can see, it is also very much on the surface. So I can actually increase the power a bit. I'm going to go to about 20 volts. So let's do that again. Now you hear some shooting. Now that shooting means that my wire speed is a bit low. So if I increase the wire speed a little bit, that should be better. And now I have a very nice weld. I just did a quick run, of course, on very thick metal, but the arc jumps very well over, so it starts very easily. So yeah, and the adjustments seem to be working quite well. I'm going to try this now on a thinner piece of metal. The thinner piece of metal now, this is about 0.8 mil. And then after that, we're going to try to put some pieces together. So let's see what this gives us. We've got a thin piece of metal. I've set the MIG to its minimum setting of 2.5 meters per minute, and I've set it to 14 volts, and let's see how that goes. But the wire is still a 0.8 wire. And I can see that I don't have enough wire speed coming in, so I'm going to give it a bit more. Well, that doesn't seem to weld too well. I might need more power maybe. Let's try. No, not enough of too much maybe. It's always a little bit finding the right way, so I think I got it now. Yeah, so that's about the right speed you want to have it. So I did a few settings while we were trying to weld, and you can see the bubbles here. That's really not good at all, but that was because the wire speed wasn't right. It was too slow, so the wire burns too quickly and it doesn't get enough feed. At the end, I adjusted everything, and here is that weld, and it's very short weld, but this is a lot better, and this is how it should be once everything is properly adjusted. What your settings are, that depends on what you're welding, and you should always test it out before in a test piece before you continue welding. So now we're going to try to weld two pieces together, back to back. And it's a fairly thin material, so I'm very curious to see on how this is going to go. Okay, I'm using some magnets to keep it in place, okay? So I've set my wire speed to 2.7 meters and 15.8 volts, and let's see what this gives us. Gonna weld it in spots, otherwise it's gonna distort. But that looks good. Welding the two thin panels together wasn't really a big issue. I know it's not a very clean weld. I didn't even clean the pieces before I started welding, which you should always do. but you can see that it works pretty well. So this was very low amperage, and you can certainly work on very thin metal panels with this, so I like it. The arc start is really good, so yeah, the adjustments are good. So all by all, the MIG works pretty well. I'm going to try it one more time on full power. So now I'm going to try this at full power, and let's see what it gives us. And now I do it again with maximum speed of the wire. So we did a couple of full power welds. This was the first one, but full power, but not with full wire speed. Here we had full wire speed and full power, and this was a repetition of full wire speed and full power. So that is looking quite all right. MIG welding with the Toolmania 3-in-1 welder works very well. I really like the torch. It's a great torch. I like the controls on the machine, and it welds very nice. The arc jumps over immediately, so I had no issues. Now, of course, you need to adjust the wire speed and the voltage for your welding depending on the piece you are welding with and depending on the size of your wire. But for the rest, this is all about you being able to weld, and you need to practice for that. I'm not a professional welder either, as you probably have seen, but I really like this welder. Now, it's time for the TIG welding. So now we're going to weld with the TIG. Now, if you're going to weld with the TIG, you've got to make sure that the connector from the TIG connects to the negative pole on the welder, and that the ground is on the positive pole. And then, of course, you still need to connect the gas to it, and the gas is a separate connection, but you need to connect to your gas bottle and then adjust the gas flow on the top of the torch, and then you can actually start to weld after you have set the welder to the proper TIG position and adjusted the power for your TIG welding. We're going to do this in a few seconds, but first of all we need to grind this tip, because the tungsten tip must be sharp, otherwise it's not going to work. And to sharpen the tungsten tip, I'm always using a dedicated grinder for that, because I don't want to pollute the tungsten tip. And make sure that you have a real sharp tip. So let's hook it up. This is the lead coming from my torch, and it's going to the negative side. There we go. You can leave your MIG connection in there, it doesn't make no difference. And then the ground, or your return I should say, because it's not really ground, is going to the positive side. There we go. So I'm going to leave it here for now. And now we need to connect the gas. And now we have a separate feed for the TIG. I probably would use a converter, and my problem now is it doesn't fit. So I have to fit a converter to the right size. So this is something you may have as well, so keep that in mind, that you may not be able to do this unless you have the right connector type. Okay, so I'm going to connect this back, and then I'm going to find another way because I really want to test it. So we hooked up the torch to the negative side, the ground clamp to the positive side. We also connected the gas, and I made a special arrangement for that. Let me see if I can show you that. This is not something you should keep forever, but I wanted to test it, and I don't have the right connector. So here is that part. I just clamped it together, but I will get a proper adapter, so at least we can test. I can turn on the welder now, and I'm going to set it to TIG, which is that position right there. I'm going to set it to about 60 amps for now. That should be good. TIG welding requires an arc to be started, and this specific welder is a touch and lift start. So you need to touch the surface with the tip and then lift it, and then the arc starts. Others have an HF start, but in this case it's a touch and lift. So keep that in mind. So if you want to start, touch and lift. So TIG welding is a very difficult way of welding, because you need to keep the distance of the arc, you need to keep the puddle going, and at the same time you have to add metal. So that is not all that easy. So let's give it a try anyway. I'm going to open up the gas now. And we can do that with a little bit less power now, because I think it's a bit too much power. Let's do that again, and we weld another area. So again, it's touch and go. So first of all, you need to create a puddle. As you can see, I've placed some very bad TIG welds on this, and this is not the device, this is me not having welded TIG for a long time. But the arc jumped all right quickly. And now it's time to do a stick welding test, and for that we will have to have the ground clamp. This is the ground clamp which we'll need to connect to your workpiece, and connect the plug on the welder to the negative side or the negative pole. And then you will need a clamp which you're going to hold your electrode, and this is an electrode that I'm using, and this is only a 2mm electrode, but you can have them in different sizes. And I'm going to set the tester to 90 amps first to run a test, and then we're going to go for full blast on this electrode. Now this electrode is a bit too small to go for full blast, but we still do it and see how good this is welding. Now the clamp with the electrode you need to connect to the positive side of the welder. And select the stick welding option. That's stick welding. I'm going to set the amperage on this side to 90 amps, which is about the right size of current for this electrode that I'm using. And let's see how that works. Alright, that was the first run, so now we're going to do it at full power, which is 160 amps. Now that's a bit too much for my electrode, but it will work. Of the 90 amps weld and the 160 amps weld, so let's knock off the slack on that. So I've been welding at 90 amps, and I also welded at 160 amps, which is the maximum on this welder. So that all worked. I know the welds are not looking that perfectly, but that's just me. But overall, I think this is working fairly well. My final conclusion on this welder is that we actually have 3 welders into one. We got stick, TIG and MIG. So that's a very positive thing. So it's a very versatile welder, I would say. The overall build, it's pretty rigid, and I did open it up, and it is IGBT technology, which is really good. But there are a few things that I don't like about it. For instance, the duty cycle. This is commercialized as a 180 amps welder. Well, reality is I could crank it up only to about 159. So, you know, this is not correct. The other thing is that it's considered to be a professional welder, and I don't think this is professional. This to me is more like a hobby or occasional use welder. And the reason for that is that the duty cycle is 60%. You know, so that means 6 minutes of welding at high power, and then you need to stop for 4 minutes. You can hardly call that a professional type. I would think for a professional version, you should consider at least 75% of duty cycle. So 7.5 minutes welding, 2.5 minutes of not welding. All right, but besides that, I think it's a good device for its price. What I like about the MIG welding is the torch. It's a good torch, and it is detachable, as you have seen in the video. So that is a very positive thing, and it feels quite good. The hose feels good. You got protection at the bottom with some springs, so that is good. So I cannot complain about this. It is a high frequency start mode, so that you got to be careful if you're going to weld on cars with electronics in it, but that's just common prevention that we have to do on anything. So on the MIG, I cannot say much. On the TIG, it's a bit of a different story. So the TIG has also a fairly good torch. However, what I think is that the fact that you cannot adjust the gas flow automatically, the after gas flow, and that you have to do everything with a valve, which is right here on top of the torch, I don't like that too much, because you're going to be welding and you're going to forget to close this valve and you're going to run your gas bottle empty. So that is something I don't like. The other thing I don't like is that it's a touch and lift method. So that's going to spoil my tungsten electrode very quickly. So these are a bit the negative sides on that. And then most of all, the negative side I think on this part is that the gas, and I've got to find the cable now. Where is it? Here it is, that the gas cable is not being attached to the welder itself. You have to attach it to your gas bottle. I don't know why they've done that. Instead of making a connector on the front bezel of it, so you can connect it there. So no, now you need to connect to your gas bottle. It's an annoyance, right? It doesn't affect the operation, but it is an annoyance. And then of course the stick welding, well, there's nothing too much to be said about this because that's quite normal behavior. So I don't weld a lot of stick. It worked fine, so no comment on that. However, I have one general comment on this as well. It's the ground clamp. It is of very poor quality, what comes with it. The touch surface is very small. Let me show you. Now this is the clamp that comes with it, and that's a clamp that I have for my other welder. You can immediately see the difference, can you? And look inside, you got a copper connection between the two sides, and you have a big copper touch surface, which is really great, and a pretty strong spring. This one, it almost looks like a clamp to start a car on the battery, a jump start for a car. There's no connection in the middle, the touch surface is very small, so I think this is not good at all. But then again, because it's using standard connectors, you can use any clamp on that. So if I'm going to use this welder, I'm going to use my better clamp, ground clamp, and my standard connector, and I can hook it up to this welder without a problem. Now the controls overall are not too bad, and it's pretty well indicated except some areas. This is the mode selection between TIG, MIG and stick, and it's hard to see what the symbols are, so after a while you get to know, so MIG, stick and TIG, but you know, just looking on the symbols you can hardly see it, and if you're going to use this for a while in the shop, you're not going to see it at all anymore. So the symbols could be a little bit more clear, although that's just a minor thing. And there is another anomaly. The wire wheels can be 1 millimeter, 0.8, 0.6. And what I noticed is that on the feed wheel, which is sitting over here, we do not have a feed for 0.6. We have one for 0.1 and we have one for 0.8. And that's the feed wheel. It says 0.8. If I turn it around, it says 0.1, and then you see only two grooves, a 0.8 and a 0.1. There is no groove to support 0.6. So I think feeding a 0.6 wire is going to be a little bit of a problem. And as a last note, for MIG welding, you have very little controls. The only things you can set is the wire speed and the voltage. You cannot set anything else. You cannot decide that you want to pulse weld. That's not possible. You cannot decide what your afterflow of gas will be. None of that is adjustable. So that is a bit of a shame. But then again, you get what you pay for. So this is really a manual 3-in-1 welder. And would I recommend to buy this? Yeah, if it's for occasional use, it's a good price and it does what it's supposed to do. So I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did, and I hope to see you on my next video. Bye.